State of History. Welcome everyone. I'm Mark Stout, Executive Director of the Howard County Historical Society. If you've not been here before, welcome to our beautiful facility here. And if you have, welcome back. Today we have a special treat. My friend and colleague Tiffany Fisk, who works for the Department of Recreation and Parks. She is the Manager of Cultural and Historic Resources. She has a very long title. I can never remember the whole thing. But let's just say that Historic and Cultural Resources. Thank you, sir. That's great.
I was going to
call anyway, she's got a fascinating and challenging job. And you'll hear a little bit about what she's been trying to do with the resources and both cultural and historic that the county owns. And you'll be surprised at how many facilities and how much land we have that the county owns and that Tiffany is responsible for. So with that, I'll leave it up to her. How about a big welcome for Tiffany?
Thank you very much, Mark. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you to everybody for coming out today. It's really nice to see everybody. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Can you hear me without the microphone? No? Okay, then I'll use the microphone. My interpreter brain kicks in and I tend to want to project, so I don't want to blast the people in the front. So as Mark said, I'm the section manager for Historic and Cultural Resources, which is part of the Natural and Historic Resources Division within the Department of Rec and Parks. We are the Bureau of Parks. Our section name changed last year, so if you've been around a little while and you're familiar with our programming, you might remember the name Living History and Heritage Section. We really don't do living history and we don't like the word heritage, so we're Historic and Cultural Resources. We also changed our focus from a lot of kind of summer camp programming things to preservation and interpretation, and really trying to get a handle on Howard County history. I really firmly believe that our programming, everything we should do, should reflect Howard County history. So I'll get started here. So our mission statement we also updated is to provide historically inaccurate information to our visitors and maintain a sense of place through both the built environment and the intangible history and culture associated with Howard County. So that's kind of a tall order because I think a lot of people don't realize just how much is here. A lot, it appears to have been buried over the years, or things kind of come and go, but there's an incredible amount here. Our focus, like I said, has changed to preservation and interpretation. And one of the things that I noticed, just to kind of backtrack for a minute, I started in October of 2022, right after Harry Potter weekend, and I'm so glad for that. I remember going around to do a site visit that first week on the job, and my boss is the superintendent of NHRD. His name's Dan McNamara. Some of you might know Dan. And I remember walking into some of the buildings and going, what's going on in here, interpretively? And what's up with the condition of this building? I mean, my background is more domestic history, 18th century, and also not first person interpretation, but third person interpretation. So I'm looking at the spaces going, how are we doing this? And when we had the opportunity to kind of reel back and de-emphasize some of the programming that we were doing so we could focus on getting our literal houses in order, we took advantage of that opportunity. We have a lot of outdated interpretation that we're in the process of redoing. So currently, program offerings, Kelly Palick, who is here, she's our program coordinator and rockstar archaeologist. She does camps. She does an archaeologist in training program. We have cemetery preservation. She does lectures. She recruits volunteers who are so dedicated to what she does. The coolest program that Kelly created last fall was in conjunction with Hammond High School, where she worked with their anthropology teacher and did an in-class, basically over the course of that fall term, teaching the students archaeology and principles and fundamentals, and then they got a couple of days in the field at the PFI, Patapsco Female Institute, and learn how to, learn to actually do what archaeologists do. And then at the end of the term, they had to give their little presentations, they were graded on their work, and it was really, really cool to see. And it was neat to see the students get excited. And it gets them an opportunity to think about a career path that maybe for a lot of those students they otherwise wouldn't have had access to. So that was really neat, and we're hoping to do that again. Our historic sites in Ellicott City, as many of you know, are open on weekends. And then we also do presentations on site-related topics this weekend. Connor Keeley, who's down at the B&O, is giving a talk tomorrow evening. So that is that. Staff focus has evolved over the last year and a half or so. We have the 5 Ellicott City sites. We're really kind of, right now, like I said, kind of pulled back and doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work with assessing our interpretive content, creating a new interpretation plan for all of the county historic sites that we can program, which isn't all of them, but it's enough. Collections and archive management. Our collections management had been kind of scattershot, and so we're overhauling that. We have artifacts that are at different sites scattered throughout the county, and it's hard to keep track of what's where, so we're looking at that. Artifact cleaning, storage, and management. All of the archaeology programming and research, and Kelly has a lab where she's got a billion boxes of archaeology and that we're constantly adding to. MHT collaboration, exhibit creation and design, which I'll talk to as we go through some of these slides. History research. Our research, because the section was always kind of more camp and programming based, there wasn't a ton, there was some research, but what we had was also very old. So now we're really digging in and kind of updating all that primary source documentation. A lot of what we had was secondary, and we have found a lot of mistakes. So we're going back and we're having to make those corrections. And then public programming, which things like this and other programs that we'll kind of do throughout the year. So connecting the Ellicott City sites. So one of the things that we have talked about in our section over the last year and a half or so is really looking at how to kind of create a cohesive interpretation. So we have the B&O station down at the bottom of the hill. We have the firehouse, which is covered in scaffolding right now, which I'll talk about in a minute. The Thomas Isaac Log Cabin, the Ellicott City Colored School Restored, and the Patapsco Female Institute. And while those sites all seem very disconnected, there are ways to integrate that in interpretation and link the people who lived and worked in those spaces and were educated in those spaces. So that's one of the things that we hope to be able to do, looking at all populations of people, not just kind of the stories that are always kind of told on a repeated loop. So looking at the fire and flood history of Ellicott City, which you all know is extensive, and really trying to gain a better understanding of that and really what it means, like I said, to be resilient. So we have a lot to do. We have an incredible team of people in our section. It's been an interesting year and a half. So someone asked earlier if I was going to have an organizational chart in here. I decided not to put it in because they're always hard to read on me. So I'm the section manager. I report to a superintendent. Below me, I have 2 program managers, one of whom is here, Keenan Holmes. He's brand new. He started in April. His jurisdiction is African American history, research, and programming. He's working on updating the interpretation of the Ellicott City Colored School Restored. And he's been able to dive in, because that's part of his focus, on a level that nobody's really done before, and he's finding things that nobody knew. And it's been really interesting every day to kind of hear some of the updates that he has to what he's been finding. And then Stephanie Kennedy, some of you have met. She's actually down at the B&O right now. She is the Ellicott City Main Street manager, and so she oversees the B&O, PFI, and the firehouse. And really, we've been working on trying to update programming specifically for the B&O and the firehouse right now. And then we have Kelly, who's our program coordinator and archaeologist. She really needs to be a program manager too. Tell your county council people, because I can't. But Kelly's digging all over the county, and she finds the cool stuff, and it is just, Kelly's essential. Kelly's really essential. A lot of the things that we know about our sites are because of the work that Kelly has done. We have a contingent or a part-time archivist / registrar named Linda Jo Nelson. She's been doing a lot of research for me right now on some special projects. And she's also working on a collections management policy. And then down at the B&O, we have 2 contingent workers who are kind of tag teaming managerial roles right now, Sydney Young and Connor Keneally. And Sydney's strength is collections management, and Connor is really programming and education, and they're both very strong in those areas. So we have a pretty solid team. We also have an awesome group of docents. We've had some turnover this year. We've had some new people who have been fantastic. Just the whole vibe in that group has changed and changed for the better, and it's just really, they're so dedicated. They work really hard, and Lily's one of them. I don't know who else is here right here. But I know it's been really, it's been fun to watch that group kind of grow, and their interest for telling accurate history is just, we kind of thrive on that. So that's been really fun. And then Kelly has a group of volunteers that help her with archaeology. So we're a very small section for everything that we have to do. And that, it's frustrating because as people who work in the history field, especially for those of us who come from a nonprofit background, we're used to having to wear many hats and being able to just do what we need to do. And it doesn't work like that in government. So that's an adjustment. Yes.
Can you tell us what you mean by interpretation? And then your last bullet says several of our sites have been misinterpreted.
Yeah,
so
just
can you just talk about that?
Yeah, so basically, so interpretation is looking at the history and then how do we understand it? How do I help you understand it? Because it's not just memorizing a list of bulleted facts, right? I mean, that's what when we, in your typical K through 12 education, it's memorize the data, spit it out for the test, maybe write a paper. We go much more in depth and try to understand the context of how and why things happen. So that's the interpretive part. And then what we have learned just in the last year and a half with really kind of reevaluation, starting with our docent manual actually, just things that were not correct at all. I don't know where some of this information came from. There were just things that were not, so it was like, okay, we need to go back and double check all this stuff and try to figure this out and make sure that we're telling people the right thing.
So those are the facts, but what's the misinterpretation?
The information that was, a lot of things that had been said for years were not correct. The information was being misinterpreted or not, just not even the right things were even being said at all. So yeah, we're basically rebuilding our content. So I'm just going to go over some of the main sites that we have. I'm not doing all of them, otherwise we'll be here for a very long time. So the B&O, I think most of you know the Station Museum. You've probably been down there. If anything, you've seen holiday trains. So it's an interesting site. Before I moved here, I lived in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. The Strasburg Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad Museum were in walking distance of my house. Not necessarily a train person, but I appreciate it. And this station is really, it's just a special, it's a gem. There's so much there to be interpreted. And we took it over in 2017. And Historic Ellicott City was involved years ago. They did a renovation of the site in the 70s. And that was the first real attempt to really save the site after Hurricane Agnes, which some of you may remember. I know coming from Pennsylvania where I lived, in the stories I heard about Agnes and the Delaware River were wild. So currently the museum is open 5 days a week. They do educational programs. As I said, Connor's doing one tomorrow evening. Right now, the goal for that site, there are maintenance issues, as any of you know, that deal with historic structures, or if you live in a historic house, it's constant maintenance. And that's the challenge of every one of our sites. So the B&O has multiple buildings and structures, and so it is constant maintenance. And trying to find experts who can handle how to deal with repairs for older buildings. Because how you repair brick on a modern structure is going to be different than how you repair brick on a 19th or a 19th century structure. So we're having to kind of assess all of that right now and figure out a plan, a long-term maintenance plan. And then also reinterpreting the site. So a lot of the interpretation that is in there was done 40, 50 years ago, and there have been some changes, but there's our staff down there have some really neat ideas, and hopefully over the next year or so we'll start to be able to integrate some of those ideas for some new exhibits. Let's see, Firehouse. This one was supposed to be the easy one to reinterpret, and you've seen the scaffolding that's been there for how long now? So Firehouse is kind of odd. So 1888, we get a firehouse. Never mind that Ellicott City was established in 1772. Why it took that long is beyond me. I know fire engines existed in the 18th century. So it's in this awkward little space. The basement is a big giant boulder. There's consistent water issues. In an attempt to start to figure out how to update the interpretation of that space, which really hadn't changed in a very long time, we started to find maintenance issues. And it was kind of one of those Pandora's box situations where you opened up one thing and then you got another problem and another problem. And the cupola was deteriorating and deemed unsafe, and hence the scaffolding. And so we're waiting for all that work to be done. And in the meantime, we're creating a new interpretation of the firehouse and working with exhibit designers and all of that. So hopefully next spring when we open for the season, the firehouse will be open. It's just a matter of when all the repair work, which seems to multiply, gets done. Who knew such a little building would be so stressful? But it's been an adventure. There you go. City council. So this building it kind of has been sitting, and the interpretation in there once again was kind of stagnant for a very long time. The school was constructed in 1880, was operational until 1953. Beulah Buckner, some of you may have either known or heard of, kind of stumbles upon the remnants of the building when she was looking for some graves, and then kind of champions, she's the one who kind of spearheads like saving the school. She figures out what it is and then wants to create a genealogy center. Ultimately that was unsuccessful, but the county takes the site over and they renovate. They don't restore it, they renovate it, and there's a difference. And they say restored, but it's a renovation. And it was opened in 2003 and really hasn't changed much since then. So Keenan has just, again, since April 22nd was your first day, has just been moving things around, finding things. We got a period appropriate globe and an abacus and the appropriate things to have in the school, getting rid of the things that really aren't relevant to a school, and really just diving into who the teachers were, where they were from, how long they taught there. He's finding all kinds of really interesting information. So that's going to be a constantly evolving space interpretively, and that's really, really exciting because it's really just sat for so long without a whole lot of new content. So I'm really looking forward to see what he ends up coming to, how it all turns out. It's going to be great. PFI, up at the top, just right up the road from here. Tapsco Female Institute starts out as a school, becomes a hotel or a resort. It has many different iterations over time. The county eventually gets the site, and it's a mess. I've seen photos before the restoration or the stabilization of the ruins, and it was so overgrown. It's kind of wild to think about what that, just cleaning all of that out in and of itself. So we know we do the Shakespeare in the Ruins up there every summer. One of the goals is to create an indoor space when we do the camps up there. When Shakespeare has their camps up there, there's nowhere to go if there's inclement weather or like with all this heat we've been having. There's absolutely no indoor space up there that's appropriate. So there's no office space up there. There's no archaeological storage space. It's just porta potties. So there's a plan to have a structure added to the property that will blend in, that will be modern, but will also be appropriate for the space. So we're working with architects right now, actually. The area that's, we call it the pool, used to be a bungalow. It was built in 1900-something. And that's where we think we want to put it. So there was a plan to put something in the ruins themselves, and so we're not fiddling with the ruins, they're called ruins. So we have another space in mind, and so the goal is to have a classroom and have offices, and Kelly will have another lab, because we have all that archaeology. And the neat thing about PFI is because of the varied histories that with the archaeology, we're finding more and more, Kelly and her volunteers are finding more and more that tells the whole story of the site and not just the school era. So that's been really interesting to see. So, and again, that's constant maintenance because those walls and the stonework it's exposed to the elements, constant mortar issues up there, moisture problems. So people always have to be up there checking things out. Thomas Isaac Log Cabin. So, yep. Oh, okay, sorry. So we call it the cabin. Everybody calls it the cabin. Even people in preservation call it cabins because, cabin is really a temporary structure. It's technically a log home, but the colloquial reference is cabin. So it's really been misinterpreted since, the last 50 years at least. When I got here as an 18th century historian, I was very excited to have, 1780s, this is great, settler's cabin, that's my bailiwick, I can interpret that. And then I found out that's not true. I was like, man. So there's a local nonprofit and research that our section actually had been doing long before I got here, and that have shed new light on the space. It was built by an African-American man named Levi Gillis. He lived there with his family for less than 10 years and then moved up to Pennsylvania and then back down to Baltimore. But we know that he's the person who built the structure in the 19th century, and it was 1850 or 51? 51-ish, I think. So that's, totally changes how we look at that space completely. One of the things that we know we want to do, even though we know Levi is the person who built the space, we don't know a whole lot about him in the time that he was in Ellicott City. We know a little bit, but don't know a ton, but we know more about the community of where the cabin was on Merriman Street. So some of you know that building has been relocated. If you go walk down Merriman Street, on the left-hand side, there's an area where that used to be. So, one of the things that we want to talk about is the African-American community that was there and how that fit into the larger community of Ellicott City. So there's a lot of interpretive potential there, and we're very excited about that. Keenan will be working on that as we move forward. The name has been up for debate because Thomas Isaac, all he did was buy the property from Levi. So Thomas Isaac was, a white businessman. So we have this interesting story about the African-American community in Ellicott City. So there's a push to have the building renamed, which our section has always wanted to do. There was a naming commission over the last year that made some recommendations, but nobody knows what's going on with that. It's kind of stopped. So we want to change the name. We can't change the name because we don't have that authority apparently. So again, talk to your county council, ask them what's going on with the naming commission. So this is a building that's been a challenge, and it's also about ownership and who's responsible for what. And our section has the people responsible for the sites in Ellicott City. It's about who has control over the interpretation. So this site has had some challenges. Bernard Fort House, if you're at the cabin and you look up the hill across the parking lot, is the Bernard Fort House. Some iffy dates are in place. 1870s seems to be what makes the most sense based on the records that survive. That is going to be the new headquarters for our section at some point. So I'm waiting to hear further on that, but that will be converted into some programming space on the lower level, archival storage, and then our offices, which I've been in there. It's a bit of a mess right now, but it is a very, very cool house. So we're looking forward to that. And it'll be better for us to be in Ellicott City and not at where we are right now out on 108 in the 1950s Rancher.
Say again where that's located?
If you're looking at the Thomas Isaac log cabin like straight on, and you look across the lot, there's that hill that goes up. Right now it's kind of blocked by the trees.
Behind lot, that's.
Yeah, behind lot up on top of the hill.
Okay.
So in the winter you get this view, which is pretty cool. But yeah. So yeah. Bland air. So this property is very significant. We're working on some things right now, and that's all I'm really prepared to say at this point. But the more we learn about this property, the more important it becomes to Howard County history, Maryland history, and United States history. I just put a couple little things up there as little teasers. But one of the stories that we want to tell the story of the enslaved people that we can document on that property. The people who built that house, we believe the 18th century house was probably where the current house stands. Also, just the different people who lived there, worked there. The Smiths were the last owners of the property. If you've lived in Howard County for a long time, you probably remember hearing about Elizabeth, or they called her Nancy Smith. She was an environmentalist and a conservationist, and near the end was, people really tried to make her sound like a crazy old lady. And she was vehemently opposed to the development of Columbia and did not want to sell her land. And a lot of the things that she said would happen, happened with water runoff and things like that. She, in a lot of ways, was very much ahead of her time, and so we want to make sure we can tell her story. Fascinating woman. The more I learn, the more intrigued I am. So eventually, when we get to the interpretation of that site, she will be part of that story, because I feel like we need to do that. She was one of the few that would not sell the Rouse. And I was at the Columbia Archives a couple months ago looking up something else, and I came across a document, the Rouse, a lot of the paperwork. And there was this list of properties, like who had sold and who hadn't. And at that point, her mother was still alive, and Blandair is listed, and then it's the Rouse women, and it says refused to sell. And I think that was like mid-60s. It's like,
Where is it?
it's off of 175. So if you're on 175 going toward 29, and Blandair, like the park, the big, where the sports fields are and everything, is on the left, across the street on the right side. So 175 cuts right through that property. And so this was a several hundred acre plantation in the 19th century, and 175 cuts it in half. So we have like the historic side, and then there's all the recreation is the other half. The long-term goal, which nobody knows when this will happen, is to have it connecting like a footbridge that goes over 175, so you can walk from one side of the park to the other. That's what they told me. But we'll see.
Does that family still live here? Or
No. She never had children.
No descendants.
I think there were some descendants in the early 2000s, but they're not local. To mine, that's what I've been told. So, but it's been interesting to learn that there's so many facets to this site.
Are they buried here or anything? Or?
Not the Smiths. There's a cemetery.
Like the descendants of Isaac Mayo.
No, Mayo, they're Anne Arundel County. So Blandair, for part of its tenure, is a second home for some of these wealthy 19th century families. It's a summer home. And they go back to Baltimore or Anne Arundel County. Like Mayo was down in Annapolis. Mayo's buried in Annapolis. So he was, Commodore of the Navy. So yeah, he's in Annapolis. Clover Hill, that's over in Rockburn Park. That's the original part of the structure is 18th century. We know a little bit about George Scott. He has had an interesting professional background. Eventually, one of my goals is to be able to compare this site to Blandair and just how the land would have been used in the period, and also just architectural history, looking at 18th century brick and the challenges that come with that. Right now, it's mothballed, and we really don't do anything with the site, but that's on my list. The Hebb House, if you're familiar with the farm in West Friendship, that house is actually very interesting. It really has more to do with the nogging that you can actually see in the attic. Nogging it's brick. It's a construction technique, and that actually dates back pretty far. So to have a structure here in West Friendship, Howard County, that has it is actually pretty cool. That property now, as many of you know, will be the Department of Agriculture, the county's Department of Agriculture. Recreation will be doing programming out there. We'll be doing archery and scout camps and a variety of things. There will be some dairy farm interpretation. We'll be interpreting the house and some of the other activity on the property. We know that there's a history of slavery, as is every other property that we have, and tenant farmers, and we'll have some interpretation out there. But our presence for our section's sake won't be that. Not what we originally thought when I started my job. We were told to create a museum. We're not doing that. So, Troy Hill, this one really pains me. So the structure that remains is probably around 1820. There's a lot of people think that that's the original house, and it's not. And an architectural historian can tell you that. But there was an earlier structure there. There are connections to the Revolutionary War. There is a root cellar below the basement. I haven't been in it, but I've seen the entrance to it. I don't feel compelled to go down there. It's dark and there are probably snakes. So, so there, because of the location and because of other things that we know about that area and the Revolutionary War, it would warrant further research to determine if that property was in fact used for, covert meetings before the war.
Where is it?
It is off of Route 1, Elbridge. If you have to kind of weave your way up, it's Troy Park today. There's sports fields. There was a plan to restore the historic component of the property, and then that was pushed aside to build all the sports fields.
There's a family cemetery on the property.
There's
Yes.
a family cemetery? I'm good.
I had a question about one there.
Okay, you know what? I think when I get through everything, I'll take all your questions.
Okay, I did have
Yeah, I couldn't see it, sorry. So we have, there's more research to be done. We know kind of that we would like to have some interpretation up there. It's just a question of when and how we do it. Right now, the house is just, as you can kind of see in that picture, it's being stabilized and it's pretty rough. I've seen pictures of when it was lived in, I think in the 1960s, and it's literally just a shell, which is sad. The Marlowe House, this is in one of our parks. It's basically just office space. So all we would do there is just have an interpretive sign outside. It talks about who lived there, who worked there. It's office space. It's actually a very cute little house. And it's got, 19th century history, and there are additions, and there are just little things to talk about, but, in the grand scheme of things, there are properties that have greater significance. Pfeiffer's Corner was relocated. Eventually, one of the things we'd like to do, this is also out of Rockburn, is juxtapose, education in a typical one-room schoolhouse with what happened at the Ellicott City Public School. And how that was different for the time period, because they were built close to each other as far as time frame goes. We don't really do a whole lot out there now. I think Recreation uses it for a lot of their programming in their camps. The Goldman Trust Bridge. So I'm working on a project right now with Parks and Wayne Davis, who I think some of you probably know, co-wrote a book with his son. And he is very interested in the whole Guilford Savage area and has done a ton of research on the granite quarries and the B&O spurs that went through there. And we have kind of colloquially a project between the bridges, between the Pratt Trust Bridge at the beginning of the Patuxent Branch Trail and the Bowman Bridge. And we'll be having signs that interpret what's there. There are a lot of ruins that I didn't know anything about when I moved here. Stone crushers and all kinds of just really cool things that are, as an 18th century historian, that's all like modern technology to me. So really, really interesting stuff. We basically maintain the bridge. There's not a whole lot else we can really do with it, but we need some better interpretation. And that's the other bridge at the other end of the trail. So again, it's all part of the think that, you can see all the trees there. Today it's a really nice little trail to walk or run on. And in the 19th century and into the 20th century, that was all an industrial complex. All those trees would have been gone, and they're quarrying granite and gabbro, and the train had spurs that went through there and picked up all that rock to deliver it to wherever it needed to go. And it's just kind of wild to think about it when you're on a trail listening to pileated woodpeckers. So that's another one where we're going to be redoing a lot of the signage. The signage that's there now is pretty dated. So we're getting there. There's a lot to do. I have 15 signs to write text for, and that was due yesterday. So Doyle Spring House, this is, I believe, on private property, but we own it, or it's kind of an odd situation. The only thing we can do there is, basically have some interpretive signage. I left the slide in only because it's so different from everything else that we have. It's rare. You don't see surviving spring houses around Howard County. You don't see very much surviving structures in Howard. It's just weird. Moving forward, so this is kind of a text heavy. I put this in here because a lot of people don't really fully understand what we are and where we're going. We're working on our new collections management policy. We are really all about trying to make sure we're following best practices. We have the staff, I'm going to give a shout out to my people, highly qualified, academically and professionally trained museum professionals. And I think this is the first time in the history of our section that we have the level that we have. We were building it, and now we have a very solid team of people who just kind of blow the job description qualifications out of the water. I think that's safe to say. And so now it's really trying to elevate things and make sure that we're doing the best work that we can with the resources that we have, and following best practices in our respective fields. And getting our interpretation up to date. We want to make sure that everything we share with all of you is as accurate as we can get it to be. And that's been challenging because we're having, like, as I said, having to go back and update quite a bit. So it's one of the jobs that I have to do, and my supervisor and I started this process, is creating a master plan for all the sites. You saw some of them, there are several that I left off. And that's an interpretation plan that also incorporates maintenance of historic properties, which is something, again, that I touched on earlier. A lot of people just don't realize is a whole separate thing. I mentioned the Historic Trades Network up there in that first bullet. That's part of the National Park Service, and that's a network of professionals who are skilled in the different mortars from different time periods and the different brick and how things interact, and how you don't use Portland cement on buildings before a certain time period. Just please don't, because then we have to go in and chip it all out because it'll kill the building. Someone said to me when I did a version of this talk in November, well, you're just going to make everything a museum? And I said, no, our goal isn't to make everything, like a historic house museum. That's not good interpretation. That's a very old model. And so we really want to try to tie everything together and tell the bigger picture of Howard County history and how that relates to Maryland history and the nation's history, because it all really does connect. I mean, that's somebody new to Howard County. It's been interesting to learn all the different connections, and a lot of the training that I have, Maryland is often skipped over. You get a lot, I'm from Pennsylvania, you get a lot of Pennsylvania history, you get a lot of Virginia history. I worked in Colonial Williamsburg for a while. I know that stuff. Nobody talks about Maryland outside of Maryland. So our job is to bring that all to light, which is, quite a bit. It's just quite a bit of work to do. So that's exciting. We'll never run out of work. Bob Lewis told me that my first week. I will never run out of work to do. So support. This is where all of you come into play, right? So we need consistent, better maintenance, right? We talked about that. Mutual understanding of what it is that we do and how people can help us. We can only say so much, and I know people in the community often have ideas and they see things and, well, what about this? This is important. We need you to do this. Come and talk to us. And if there are things that you think are important, come and talk to us, and we can tell you whether or not it's on our radar. If it's on our radar, then we'll it's on my list of things to do. Sometimes things aren't on our radar because it's a big county, and as you can see, we have a lot of stuff to do. But also, if we're all in communication with each other, that helps us stay organized, and it helps us stick to the list. When everything kind of starts to come in scattershot from different places, it just adds to the chaos. And there's already a lot of chaos. I don't know why chaos. But it's, like I said, we have a very small team. It's me, I have 2 program managers, I have Kelly doing archaeology, and a couple of part-time people. That's it for all of our sites. So things take a lot longer than any of us would like. And that's the other thing we ask people to keep in mind. If something isn't getting done fast enough, it's because it's not for lack of trying. It's because often other things pop up that we're told we kind of have to deal with. But if there are things, also like support, talk to your county council people. Go to those meetings and say, we need more support for our historic sites. I mean, we can't do that, but you guys can. If there are things that are important enough to you, go fight for them, because then we can fight for you internally. So, we have our limitations. So that's kind of it. I had to. So I appreciate everybody coming out. I will take questions. Oh, lots of hands. So you had a question about land air.
Do you know the history of how you got one there?
Yes, sort of. It's a little weird, but yeah. I know there was some legal things that, like Elizabeth Smith passes away, doesn't sign her will. Apparently, the story goes, she met with the lawyer and says, I'll sign it today, and then died the next day. Just don't ever do that. And then there was with some descendants that were, I guess, nieces and nephews. There were a couple of things that went on, and eventually the county gets it. I don't know all the particulars. And then the county started to look at restoration work. There was, what is his title at Mount Vernon now? Is he archaeology or historic preservation at Mount Vernon? He was a grad student at the time, wrote his master's thesis on Bland Air. And that was like 2003, I believe. And that piece has kind of been my jumping off point for everything. And that was helpful because he talks about the Smiths and he talks about all that, but he also goes all the way back to the 7th or the 18th century and, kind of gives an architectural history of the property, which is fascinating. So that property is complex, to say the least. We will always be doing something with Bland Air until we retire. So
Memorial House, when is that open to?
that's just the county office. So that's not open to the public. That's a county office for the park supervisor who has that zone. So it's literally just an office space, which is kind of a bummer because it's cute. It's like an 1840s house, and yeah. So yes.
Is there a database, or do you plan to have a database with all this property information that would be on the internet?
Would that be planning and zoning? Do they do that? And then a lot of the properties are registered with the Maryland Historical Trust. So they have numbers, they have like a coded number. So the state has that in addition to probably DPZ. We have our own internal list. But the other thing for us is that sometimes things change and properties or sites get moved to other parts of the county's responsibility. So what I have now isn't always necessarily my responsibility. So it changes. Even since I've been here, the West Friendship was originally supposed to be under my jurisdiction and now it's Department of Agriculture. So there's some fluidity to it, but from a documentation of what historic houses we have in the county, the Maryland Historical Trust has that. So that's like the master
Is
list.
that available online?
Yeah.
It's the Maryland Historical Trust website. It's a program called Medusa.
Mhm.
You can click on, anybody can access the above ground structure information. They also have archaeological information, only professional archaeologists can access that. But they have all the historic site inventory for all the properties in our county.
Building on what you said, it's also an incredible interactive map, Medusa map, which you can zoom in all the way, and all the work that Ken Short and others have done in research, even in non-designated sites.
Mhm.
There is a lot of incredible maps.
Yeah, Ken is great. So Ken Short is an architectural historian who works in our planning and zoning department, and that's a whole other department from us. And he really just hadn't been reached out to by Rec and Parks in the past as much as I think he probably would have liked to have been. And I've been leaning on him pretty heavily with a lot of the projects that we've been doing. He is a wealth of knowledge. I've learned a lot from him in the year and a half that I've been here. It's been incredible. We have some really just talented people in the county, which is fantastic. I saw a couple other hands. Yes.
Yeah, my comment is that it seems like your mission is kind of missing the mark, that it's too site specific to particular properties.
What do you mean?
I mean, when you're saying that we have this site, the bridge, we have this site, the courthouse.
Mhm.
But my thing is that Howard County goes so much further back as far as how they interpret the people who got Charles Carroll, for instance. We're approaching the 250th anniversary
Right.
of the country. How do you interpret, the people that came here and lived in Howard County?
That's what we're going to do.
And that's where, I've this past president since the American Revolution. We want to interpret it with the youth and things like that.
Right.
To do these interpretations accurately, that's where we want to have those kind of property. I talked to the cemetery boards, like for instance, Shipley's Grant. There's a cemetery just waiting to be renovated where the sign's misplaced. There's scouts who want to clean it up and move it there and say who this person is. As a nonprofit organization, we want to have ceremonies commemorating who was buried there, and that there's a cemetery there, which you can't, now there's a prominent community there that people can't see. We have markers to identify these sites.
Yeah, that's not, we don't, I mean,
We have.
you're on the, Kelly's on the cemetery commission.
No, I'm just saying that you go over these places and you go looking, we have a database of the Sons of Revolution, that a revolutionary people was buried here. You go to look for the grave, there's nothing to be found. And I remember I was listening to one of your meetings and they says, well, these developers will run it over with the, and not paying attention that they just destroyed maybe a prominent grave.
Yeah, there's no, they don't always follow the regulations at first.
And once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can do about that. I mean, unfortunately, that's a problem that happens everywhere in this country. So, I mean, just with some of the research that we've been doing with formerly enslaved people that we were trying to track and figure out where they went after they left certain properties. In Philadelphia, there was a cemetery that was just completely obliterated. Nobody moved grave, it's gone. It's just, there's only so much you can control. So, and if there are friends groups, especially with cemeteries, that pop up and they say they want to do things, then work with the cemetery commission and do it. I mean, that's not something that we specifically get into because that was never under the jurisdiction of our section. So
I went to your meeting, and then you mentioned the Attorney General not cooperating. Well, I talked to that person about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he didn't want to be happy about it, but I talked to him.
So, but yeah, to speak to your earlier point, I don't think we're missing the mark at all. We're actually, like I said a few times, having to recalibrate the focus of what we're doing. And that just takes an incredible amount of time. So getting a handle on just what the history is and where things are and then having to update, you know, kind of secondhand news information, and then trying to tell those stories. So much of what we have is 19th century that's documented. Getting back to that, you know, I'm on a committee with Mark about the Revolutionary War. We met yesterday. We're working on it. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. So, and it's trying to find what was going on here in the 18th century when, by the way, we weren't Howard County, we were Anne Arundel County. So that means looking to Anne Arundel and looking at other places for that information, which when you're a small section and have responsibilities that you were told you have to do versus these other projects that would be nice to be able to do, you have to balance it all. So we know, and we're working on it, but again, we are tiny and we've made incredible progress in the last year and a half compared to what was happening before. And Kelly's been here longer than me, so she'll tell you that. Mark.
I'm wondering if maybe you can talk also a little bit about the land county owns that, you know, Kelly's doing some archaeological work on the site across from Fairgrounds.
Oh, yeah, out of the farm, so West Friendship. So Kelly, when I got here, was doing archaeology out there in West Friendship. She's found evidence of tenant farmers and enslaved quarters and has been researching that extensively. So eventually, and she's given talks on that. I think that was, you did that here and we did that at the B&O last February. So that Kelly's doing that. She's doing archaeology at PFI. We'll be doing archaeology at Bland-Air. She just did something with Sykesville back in April. Geez, it's July. So I mean, it's a lot. It's just we are all over the place.
And I'm just archaeology staff.
Yeah. And she's got to dig the pits, assess everything, sift it, bag it, clean it, fill the pits back in when she's done, tart, you know, everything. And of course, that never gets done fast enough for some people. Yeah, we have a very good handle on what we need to do. We just need, that's where we need support. So, Connie.
Yeah, I kind of see your historic delicacy. I wonder what the condition of the interiors are of Bland-Air and Clover Hill, where we do the decoration houses. We're always wondering what we haven't been inside of those to see.
I would say Clover Hill's in slightly rougher shape than Bland-Air. Mm-hmm. I was only in Clover Hill once when I first started, and because it's mothballed. You have to kind of make a bunch of noise so the raccoons run away. But Bland-Air, you know, the problem is these houses are mothballed, and while Blandair has a heating system, it's, you know, it's still not climate controlled to any sort of like museum standard. So there's deterioration in there, but that's on the list, I would say, our sort of short-term list to address it. And the outbuildings, so we're shoring up that, a lot of the outbuildings are in very rough shape. So, in worse shape than the house itself. So we're trying to get that stuff stabilized and then start working on other things. So there are, like I said, with Blandair, there are things in the works. I'm keeping it quiet for right now just because. Yes?
How many acres are on that side?
Oh,
The historic part of the structure is under a preservation easement. It's about 28 or 20.
for just that around the historic sites.
Yeah.
But the rest of it is much larger. So there, you know, the plans for how the rest of that will be developed are still in flux. There was an old plan that was created, several years ago. I don't remember the exact date, long before I was here. And I would argue that it's obsolete now and would probably need a reevaluation with new community involvement, but I don't have that kind of control. So if I had my way, the historic preservation of that property would be #1 priority, and everything on that side, if I had my way, if I were this like commander of the world, it would be agricultural interpretation and interpreting the enslaved population that was there, and just really digging into everything that we have found so far, which is quite a bit. So,
So what prevents you from focusing on one and going to the finish line?
you can't. You just can't. So my priorities, and like I've been here like 20 months. My priorities have changed so many times, and it's not just because it's what I want to do, it's what I'm being told. So I started in October of 22, November, I was told we need to build a museum at the farm. Kelly and I'd been there once. I know nothing about this history, and we had to come up with an interpretive plan, and I relied heavily on Kelly for that. We created a really good document that our entire chain of command was very impressed by. And then everything kind of went, you know, in a different direction, and I'm not going to go into all that, but which is fine because we have other things to focus on. And so, but for like a couple months, that's what we were focusing on. And then that changed. And then it was, you know, we hired Stephanie in January of 23, and getting her acclimated with all the Main Street sites and starting to figure out the firehouse. And we've had some staffing changes, so taking on Shakespeare, updating the docent policies and all that. I mean, there's just so many other things that come in that just derail you. Like I said, I have to write 15 signs for Between the Bridges, and when can you sit down and learn 19th century industrial history in Guilford and then write signs that are not too intense for somebody who's out for a run and still get them to read the sign? So there's just a lot to do. It's fun, but it's a lot. Yes.
The artifacts that you all find. My son works for Howard County Roads, and he's been here his whole life. He brought down a big truck because he had a CDL, and he said it was the largest truck Howard County had. They found a wheel down just by the cabin during the flood.
Okay.
A big gristmill wheel is what we think it was.
Oh, okay. Like a big granite.
He said it was huge.
Mark, do you know about?
Yeah, there are two actually, and one of them the county's giving us, and it's going to be over here next to the children's museum.
That's what I was just. That's why
He said he drove it out. He said it was the biggest truck Howard County had. I mean, he's moved up in the he's been there like young. But he said it was big.
Oh yeah.
We always wondered where it went.
Yeah.
He said it was the best thing he'd ever seen. He said he drove that truck down here to get that thing out of here. Then he said we always wondered where it went.
Yeah, it's going to be installed this year.
Yes, they found it. It's
Brand new store.
I'll have to tell them that.
Quick question on the farming. You said you want to interpret farming culture and slavery. And I'm just wondering how much pushback are you getting with the political correctness that people don't want to hear the stories told about slavery anymore.
Well,
You know, and-
stories of slavery really have not been told in Howard County, so it's not like there's no anymore there. We're
Well, that's
actually,
what, does it want to do people, that's the kind of thing is like, you know, telling the story makes people feel better, you know, in society today, you know. And-
well, history doesn't always make you feel good.
Believe me, I understand.
You know, I mean,
I'm from the South. But I'm just saying, it's like,
Good line.
the priority, or is that a priority today from our local government?
Is what a priority, not
I
telling
mean,
the
to
story?
tell the story
or-
about farming as returned to the farming as it existed during the.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to what the administration wants, I can speak to what our focus is. And our focus is to tell accurate history, whatever that is. So, warts and all, right? I mean, it's interesting, having worked in Virginia and having come from the north, but just right over the line, just the difference in how Maryland handles its history. And this area handles its history. It's definitely been an adjustment for me. You know, with the farm and West, every property that we have that was a plantation at one point had enslaved labor. We know that.
I'll say that I was with the American Legion before race competition. The girl gave her a topic on Charles Carroll, and it wasn't Charles. I mentioned Charles Carroll, but she gave a topic that slavery existing today, and I said, well, that's interesting. And I talked about Charles Carroll being a sign of the Declaration of Independence and his relationship being a large slaveholder. And that got her thinking, again, and she wrote found his origin based on those comments. And I'm just saying, you put the context in relationship.
Context is everything. So,
Exactly.
and there are people that I've encountered that don't want to deal with it. They don't think it's important. They don't really care what was happening somewhere else because that's not what happened here. And I'm like, but it's all connected. So when you read the diary of George Cook, who lived on a property that was next to Blandair called Hazelwood, and that's all long gone. So Hazelwood's next to Blandair. If you're driving on 29 and Columbia Down Center is to your left, and the lake is there, that was the outer edge of George Cook's property. There are stories, he references the enslaved on his property. He references selling an enslaved cook to Austin Woolfolk in Baltimore, who was a notorious brutal slave trader. So we can document chattel slavery happening here. There's some really, really intense things that we've uncovered just in the last year, and we will be telling those stories once we can kind of triple check our references, because that's what good scholars do. So if I see something in a diary, just because George Cook says it probably happened, because a lot of the stuff that he writes about checks out, but I have to go back and make sure that, okay, well, where did she go? And here's also, and then the things I've learned about him since I moved here have been just jaw-dropping. Just absolutely horrible. There's gonna be some tough stuff that comes out, and that's our job. Our job isn't to sugarcoat, our job isn't to whitewash, our job is to tell an accurate story. And there are days where it gets intense and we're reading these primary source documents and you have to take a break. You have to walk away from it because it's ugly. It's really ugly and it's tragic. Mark?
Yeah, just this whole topic is fascinating because there are so many people who come to this county, have no idea. They have no clue. Last year we were at the Maker Fair down in Columbia in Maryland. And we were with a park, and people would come by, and they saw us, and we had maps out, the map and the Hopkins map, and they said, well, what was this land? I'm like, this was a plantation. They said, almost everything around you. 90% of this county's land were plantations with enslaved labor, and people were shocked, because folks come here for different reasons. They come here for diversity, they come here for our school system, and it's an accepting place. Yeah, but it wasn't always.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to understand, like all these, the manor houses. Those were plantation owners' houses. That's where they lived. They're beautiful, and we like to look at them and view them. But let's acknowledge what happened. I think it's important. So.
Yep. Thank you. Any other questions? worn you out. All right, well, thanks again for coming out. If something occurs to you, want to talk to me more about, my contact information is on the website. I might have a few, I meant to bring business cards, and I think I might have a few in my purse, but come up and talk to me afterwards, and, we'll continue the conversation. But thanks again for coming out today.